Welcome to the latest episode of the Celtics Rundown live stream. Back again, a GFOP, good friend of the program from CLNS Media, the one, the only Bobby Manning. Bob, thanks for taking the time today.
What's up, Bobby? Bobby's Unite.
Yes, sir. Always a better episode when we have Bobby to the second power. So I'm excited. You're the perfect person to have on for this episode too, because the two of us, especially you, have been diving a lot into what this offseason might look like in terms of providing trade scenarios, not just saying, hey, this figures to be a summer of change for the Celtics, but here's what it actually might look like. And the two of us just playing armchair GM, cooking up different proposals. So you are exactly who I wanted to have on this week to dive into it. Why don't we start here? Okay, my Wi-Fi is back. Why don't we start with Jrue Holiday? And there's some latest rumblings around him in different scenarios that might pop up. So you give me your take. Brian Robb will go there first. He just had from Mass Live that the Clippers are a team that could be at least having interest in Jrue Holiday. How realistic do you see the Clippers as a landing spot for him?
I think it's a pretty good one. It's a team that had interest in him previously, so they knew the kind of long-term commitment they might have to make to Holiday. Now, maybe they wouldn't have done the extension that the Celtics ended up doing there, which I think is a big factor in all of these discussions, is how long-term of a piece these teams see Jrue being for them, given they signed through 37, I believe. So Clippers make some sense to me. They have a lot of different contracts that they can consolidate. They have enough room under the second apron that they'd have to eat that hard cap that would come with that. But I think they can still build a roster around, a pretty substantial, starting 5-6 guys, at the top of their rotation. They'd be a thinner team in that case. But I think you can hold on to Derek Jones if you're the Clippers in a trade like that. You can keep Nick Batum. Obviously, you're going to have Kawhi, Harden, Powell, Zubac. So that's, 6 guys that you can really build around, 6-7 guys there. And then, fill in the rest of the roster however you'd like at that point. I think the real strength, and we were kicking around the Mavericks one yesterday after the Mark Stein report, the real strength in this trade to me for the Celtics is that they probably, in my mind, don't have to give up any draft capital moving off Holiday in that kind of trade. If it is, it's minimal. I do not see it being a first-round pick in a deal like that. And for all the guys who would come back, maybe a Chris Dunn, Drew Eubanks, Bogdanovich would certainly be the one that you would have to come back to the Celtics to make that trade work money-wise. Those are all one-year guaranteed deals. Even a Cam Christie or smaller salary like that to make it work. Those are all one-year deals, and those won't be extremely difficult to move off later in the season, later in the summer, whenever you decide to make moves like that to get even further below the second apron line, which you're trying to do here. So, I thought the Mavericks were a decent trade partner for the Celtics. I think the Clippers are a potentially great one here.
Yeah, I want to hit on a crucial point there, and that is regarding the second apron. It's not that they have to get under, should they choose to do so, and we both think they will. It's not that they have to get under this summer or this off season. It's by the end of the league year that's upcoming. So, like you said there, they can take back salaries, especially expiring ones that are theoretically easier to move. And generally speaking, that's the case. And then pivot and reroute those individuals by the time the trade deadline arrives. And so, getting players like that, not having to give up draft capital, those are huge wins on top of the primary benefit, which is the motive for some of these trades, like a Jrue Holiday deal, and that is to shed salary to ultimately get below the second apron. And it's funny because initially, before the Tatum injury, I think conventional wisdom was they'll do that in multiple offseason cycles, get under the second apron. Now it looks like they're going to try and attack that immediately, whether it's this offseason or it extends to by the time the deadline has expired. Okay, now they are ultimately under the second apron and can reset the deck, so to speak. With the Clippers, I do think that's one that's going to be strongly considered because, like you said, I think there's probably some second round capital coming out of the Celtics pockets in a 3-team trade involving Holiday and the Mavericks. But in that scenario, at least you can get a player who might be a meaningful contributor and a rotation player when Jayson Tatum returns, presumably in 2 seasons, whether that's Daniel Gafford and you address the uncertainty at center to a degree, or a player, not everyone loves him, but PJ Washington, when you have both Tatum and Brown together, he could be a nice complementary wing.
Yeah, and so those guys make a lot of sense on one-year deals too. I think they're players who are valuable around the league potentially if you had to move off them later. Um, I looked at that deal though as one where you would try to pull in a team like the Nets with some cap space, with some ability to take on a contract, and to me, Washington would make a lot of sense going to Brooklyn, a team that could flip them again for more assets coming back, and then you actually save some money right away if you're the Celtics. Because again, the fans are going to freak out when they look at a lot of these deals because they're like, oh, nothing's coming back. Why would they do that? Blah, blah. These trades are to save money. And specifically, this Clippers one we're kicking around here, I like it because I guess you could say the Mavericks one too if you're moving some money to a third team. It allows you to keep more of the rest of the roster intact. And that's why I go to Drew, because it's one of the bigger salaries. It's one of the ones that could more impactfully get you closer to that second apron line. And maybe, I know we're going to get to Kristaps in a little bit here, you could keep a Kristaps to start next year. You could hold on to, one of your more expensive players like White and Brown and those other guys and actually try to compete this year, which I think this team should intend to do. So you can address your financial needs, which is the motivator in a lot of these deals we're going to talk about here, while staying competitive next year. And I don't think there's anything that prevents the Celtics from at least being competitive next year. Now, what does that actually mean? We'll have to debate that, as we see what the roster is going to look like here. But these trades aren't about getting back awesome stuff for Holiday. It's about saving as much money as you can, limiting the amount of draft picks that have to go out because, as we've seen with the reports, there are going to be a lot of teams that expect draft capital coming back with Holiday because of the 3 years, $100 million. So I think fans have to adjust their expectations a little bit in some of these deals. Like Gafford coming back, to me, if that's all that comes back in a Dallas trade, I think that's awesome. Bogdanovich, several one-year deals here and no picks going out, I think is a major win for the Celtics in a trade with the Clippers there, because ultimately, I hate to describe them this way, but Holiday's a little bit of a luxury for a team that doesn't have championship aspirations this year.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to put it with Holiday. He was a piece that put you over the top, and now the circumstances have changed, unfortunately. I do want to dive into just how competitive, how good we think the Celtics can be next season, most likely without Tatum, but we'll talk about him too in a little bit first. And look, I'll start here with just a side point that if it is a deal with the Clippers and you get Chris Dunn, if you're moving Holiday, point guard becomes another immediate need. I think we all expect that Peyton Pritchard slides into the starting five in that scenario. So now you need to figure out, okay, who's that third member of the backcourt? Chris Dunn, really good defensive player, coming off a nice season in LA. That makes a lot of sense. It addresses a need where you're not going to have much money to play with to make a veteran acquisition. And in the draft, there's so much uncertainty in terms of who's going to be available and what the most responsible things to do with those selections, 28 and 32 are. So it's going to be really interesting. The point I want to hit on, though, that you just mentioned there is bringing Porzingis with you into the season, because, man, it's twofold. I think teams understand what he could potentially bring. I think they understand that, hey, that was not indicative of Porzingis in the playoffs when he's dealing with this illness and the effects of, post-viral syndrome. At the same time, there are so many durability concerns surrounding his career that if you bring him into the regular season, you run the risk that something happens and now maybe you can't trade him. Maybe it's a season-ending injury, God forbid, or something where it just becomes that much harder to move off his deal. And so that's why when I look at, to me, a priority, and we'll get to Luke Cornett later on, but he should be a priority. And so that's why I look at, if you want to have room to operate, to stay under the second apron, it might make more sense to find what you can for Kristaps Porzingis this summer as opposed to waiting.
Yeah, it's just going to come down to whether there's an opportunity. And I try to put some deals together. None of them were that great. Maybe he fits into a larger trade if Giannis gets moved or something like that, where another team takes him in as a player that they want to have part of that future picture going forward. It's tricky because, yes, he's an expiring contract, but he's a pretty big contract. So the stuff coming back to Boston and those deals, a lot of the stuff I had coming back isn't great. Like, could you go get a Nikola Vucevic from Chicago, trade those expiring salaries, save a little bit of money there? I guess that's something you could do. Um, but is it really worthwhile? Does it make sense, especially if picks are going out again with Porzingis and something like that? I don't know. Like, you could crazy enough trade Porzingis for Smart and
Oh, I
send
was going
Porzingis
there,
back to
Bob. Yes,
Washington.
talk about it.
But
Because
after all the excitement, Smart's back in Boston, is even on the team next year after that. Like, I think that's the kind of summer it's going to be for the Celtics here, where there's a couple different steps involved to getting below that line. But maybe I'm a little biased toward Porzingis. I love what he brought to the team these last couple of years. I think he's a great complement to Brown. Again, if you're going to try to be competitive this year, where are you going to score your points? A lot of it's going to be out of that Brown Porzingis pick and roll action. I think if you're going to try to at least make the playoffs and make some noise next year. So I think you can carry an expiring contract into the season, still have some flexibility there. You bring up a good point with the injury risk, but their only risk there effectively is if you're below the second apron line by doing something with Holiday and Hauser, maybe Porzingis' deal just expires at the end of the year. And I think the more challenging discussion there is whether you'd consider extending Porzingis if he's willing to take 15, 20 million a year, something lower that actually works in your future at that point financially. I think that's where the injury risk actually comes into play a little bit. If he continues to deteriorate and has some more issues going forward, and he hasn't had a ton in Boston outside of the illness, other than the big one in the playoffs there. So, it's all a risk here. I think a lot of these moves are risks too. Can you move off a guy like Bogdanovich coming back easily later in the season? I mean, that's a guy Atlanta had to attach picks to when they sent him out to LA. I know he had 2 years left at that point, but not a guy I'm sure a lot of teams are thrilled about taking back at 16 million in the middle of next season. So there's risks with all this stuff. And I think at the core, to me, and they might end up feeling differently about this, and obviously we haven't gotten anything on the record from the team about this, is what do they view next season as? Is it a step back? Is it a massive reset? I mean, if we're talking about getting below the luxury tax, Bobby, all of these guys got to go. Holiday, Porzingis, Hauser, etc. So at that point, you're talking about a more substantial teardown and a real step back next year. If it's just a second apron reset here and see what happens to start the year, I think Porzingis fits into your plans to start next year. But I don't know, were there any deals you looked at that really struck your interest with him?
So it was not the top one. I'm going to end with that here in this answer, but the Marcus Smart thing is
It's
a juicy
intriguing.
scenario, right? Whether it's,
Way to get
I'm with
fans
you.
invested again next year. Yeah,
Oh, it's interesting because I would say fans would love it. He's a polarizing figure. Like, as much as he's beloved among the fan base and especially the local within the region, not just the city, there are people who came up with a million Marcus Smart trade scenarios while he was here and pointed to him as a part of the problem, why they weren't breaking through to a title. So I think there would be some fans who it's almost like reliving. Nightmare's too strong, but you get the idea. And so it is, though, it's probably more likely if they got Smart, they would reroute him, but it is possible they could take him, save some money, and welcome him back. The fans who loved him, and that is the majority of the fan base, I think that they would be ecstatic about, okay, if we're bracing for a year without Tatum, then getting this beloved figure back, that makes us happy. That pacifies us to a meaningful extent. That's not the most intriguing scenario, though, as much as most people love Marcus Smart. And look, I mean, what a win for the media that would be, Bob. He was tremendous to talk to and get information, take the temperature of the locker room. So I'll stop right there. We get Marcus Smart back. That's definitely a win for us.
for sure. And I don't know if he'd actually play for the team next year. Maybe he'd start the year here and end up somewhere else later on. There's an injury risk there too, especially for a guy on a $21 million deal. If he's down for his budget next year, yeah, it doesn't save you a ton of money or enough to get below the tax on it or a second apron on its own there. So that's one I definitely popped in my head. The Vucevic one's obviously interesting. You're kind of just swapping out centers at that point. The other one that's just effectively swapping guys and saving you a little bit of money is John Collins. And Clippers had interest in Drew Holiday previously. Jazz had significant interest in Porzingis previously, and I think probably would have been the team that signed him in free agency if the Celtics didn't get that deal done that summer for Smart and all the pieces that went into that. So that one caught my eye too. Is John Collins a guy you see as part of your future? And do the Jazz see Porzingis as potentially part of their future, and they want to swap those guys and give them fresh starts? That saves you about $4 million right away, which is something, as you're trying to squeeze below some of these lines. And then can you keep him for, like I talked about with Porzingis, 20 million after that? Like, can you squeeze that salary down a little bit and have him be part of their future? They do need a little bit of athleticism. I do think they need a little bit of burst in their lineup now. This is a team that looked slow at times last year. I thought this is a team that needed some explosiveness, and that's John Collins. The shooting's gone to hell, which is the real concern there. But that's another one that caught my eye that sounds at least feasible. Jazz have a lot of money to work with, so they can maybe even bring back multiple. Like, could you send Hauser and Porzingis? You couldn't do that actually until you get below the second apron. But there's a lot of different stuff that they can do here. It's almost impossible to predict, right? Because you got to get third teams involved. You got to figure out where all the money's going. Can you actually get below these lines after you make the first move? Like, this stuff's impossible to predict. But they have options. And there are a couple teams out there that will probably be willing to take on money. But like I said, they don't have a ton of draft capital, Bobby. And the position they're in, they shouldn't be frivolously throwing draft picks around if they don't have to here. Like, those are going to be important parts of their team building going forward.
Yeah, and when it comes to those 2 picks, I get asked all the time, do you think they would package them and move up? Forget about trying to use one to help offload some money. Would they do that? And I think the idea that they're so good at developing players, and you can point to the growth of their stars, Tatum and Brown, but more importantly, on down the roster, Pritchard, Cornette, Hauser, etc. I think that can be used as an argument for or against, but it's an incentive to stay where you are and pick rather than forfeit the opportunity to get 2 prospects potentially in a draft, which across sports, the draft is such a crapshoot and you don't know what's up to Celtics mouthpiece. Yes, sir. We got 2 Bobbies here. And when it comes to the idea, I think if you're going to trade a pick, to me, it's not the first, it's the second, it's 32nd overall. And it's the motive being, again, to shed some salary here. So that's how I look at it compared to, hey, package 28 and 32 and try and get a prospect you might feel a little bit stronger about further up in the 20s. But the Porzingis trade and look, there's always going to be people when you send out trade scenarios that I hate it. Why would they do this? And if you feel that way, Bob, you let me know. But the Porzingis trade that I find the most appealing, if they're to do something this summer, the Lakers have a clear need at center. Yes,
I had them on my list too.
Rivalry. Yeah. And again, this is far. Sometimes we talk about, hey, the best part of the return is the money saved. In a 3-team deal with the Lakers, it might be the only part, but I think that's a pretty big win, especially maybe you don't have to move draft capital. Maybe you loop in a team like the Pistons and you get back Simone Fontecchio, who's only making $8 million, and Marcus Sasser, who's on his rookie deal. And to me, if you do that, maybe you accept even that Sasser is your backup point guard. There's some fieriness there with his game. And again, I think the Pistons, for the money they'd be taking on, let's say they absorb Kleber and Rui Hachimura's expiring contracts, I think it's a no-brainer for the Lakers. If you're Detroit, I think you have to get a second-round pick back because that's like $18 million you're taking on. But if you're Boston, if you go from Kristaps Porzingis at $30 million, you can absorb Marcus Sasser's contract, and you're only taking back roughly $8 million, maybe a little more. I think that's a pretty big win from a financial perspective.
Yeah, and Detroit's one of those teams. They got the money right now. How much of that gets eaten up by Malik Beasley at a certain point, and they could be hard capped at the first apron if they use the mid-level on him. That's going to decide a lot of how much money they actually have. I looked at the Hornets there too in a potential Celtics-Lakers trade. Could they eat some money? They have a lot of space below their aprons, and maybe some deals that they're willing to send out to make the money work here. And Okoji's on $7 million, Diabate's on $2 million. So I had them going to the Lakers with Porzingis. Rui going to Boston, which I actually think that satisfies a couple different things in terms of you save 10, 12 million bucks here, moving off Porzingis and only taking back Rui. Rui's a real player, real piece that could factor into your front court going forward at a couple different positions on the relatively young side there too. I don't know if the Lakers would want to give him up because he's been such a substantial part of their rotation to this point. But like you said, Bobby, they need a center, and maybe Porzingis fills that need for them now and into the future. But a lot of the questions with these trades are the third teams willing to take on a Kleber at $11 million? That's probably costing you a second round pick, at least I would think. A Shake Milton going out the door to make the money work there. Lakers inching a little closer to that second apron where they'd be hard capped at that point. So these deals have a lot of considerations when you're talking about draft picks, when you're talking about hard caps, when you're talking about the Celtics actually saving enough money in these deals. Like those three considerations you always have to factor in here. And I think this one's feasible, but are there other ways the Lakers can have a stopgap at center? Even they got by with Hayes last year until they couldn't. So they got to find some balance there in terms of a piece that can actually sustain into the postseason and one that, it doesn't cost them a ton here. This one to me, both in your scenario and in mine, probably has too many things that need to go right for it to actually happen. So again, I'm leaning toward going into the year with Porzingis and seeing what happens and addressing that later, or maybe potentially even keeping him long term. Like the fans are so down on him right now, and I get it because of how it ended. But this guy was really good for you for the bulk of 2 years, and I think you see that forward if you can. Again, if they got to get below the tax, they're going to have to do some really difficult stuff this summer.
Yeah, and I'm going to end with throwing this back to you with a forward-thinking question about Porzingis. But first, I just want to say, I saw someone during the playoffs tweet out about the trade that brought Kristaps to Boston that all the teams involved lost that deal. And I almost started pulling my hair out. Are you kidding me? The Celtics don't win a title without Kristaps Porzingis, from the simple fact that he was crucial to them having the 1 seed and home court advantage throughout, to how well he played in game 1 of the finals. He was a contributor in game 5 when he defied the medical staff to go out there. So the idea that the Celtics, you're going to paint that as a loss when they won a title with him as their starting center, that's asinine to me. And now pivoting here to that question, under the scenario of the Celtics, they find other ways to get under the second apron or at least close enough to it, and then they can say we have Kristaps on an expiring deal. Let's say they bring him into the season, they keep him throughout. I just want to outline this so that listeners who might not know, Bob, are crystal clear on this. Porzingis stays. He's here throughout the season. 1, does his $30 million contract come off the books and get them under the second apron? And 2, do they lose any rights involved with that scenario? And do they have to pay anything to retain his rights to make it easier to re-sign him should they want to? And does that affect whether or not they're ultimately under the second apron?
Well, there's a couple things there. They can extend him at any time throughout next year, starting now, effectively. So that's rights that they have at the moment. They will have his bird rights, so they can sign him for whatever they want next offseason. That's not impacted. Obviously, it would go toward whatever second apron, factors would be at that point, luxury tax, all of that. But again, like I said, I don't think he's a guy who makes $30 million on his next deal. I think he's probably someone who makes 20, 25 at most. So yeah, he'll be at 30.7 next year. After that, he's 31 years old. How many suitors, how much cap space is there for him the following summer? I think he's obviously someone who likes it here and has found his home. So I think they could come up with a deal. I mean, with the last contract extension they did when he came over from Washington, that brought him down from the mid 30s down to 30 a year. So he already took
he left $16 million on the table.
Yeah, so he already took a reduction in taking an extension here. So yeah, they have a lot of rights to keep him. They have a lot of flexibility there. At that point, how much other cap stuff is coming off the books? Not a ton. But I think, one thing we didn't kick around is that Sam Hauser at 10 is probably gone this summer. I think that's going to be the most likely player who goes out the door for a number of reasons. So that's probably coming off the books this summer. Holiday, you would think they figure out something with him this summer. So that's about 40 coming off your books long term. You're still going to have Brown. You're still going to have Tatum. You're still going to have White, who's on a great deal, I think. So I do think you have flexibility at that point to bring Porzingis back at a lower number and build out the rest of the roster with smaller salary guys, draft picks, stuff like that, and continue building around Tatum and Brown. And I know we didn't bring up Brown in this episode, but I'll keep it short at this. I think you keep him.
You're good. We're going to get to him. So
Yeah.
we got a few items left on the docket.
Yeah. So I'll tease that one. I think you keep him. I think you consider everything there, but you keep them. And so let's say they move forward with Tatum, Brown, Porzingis, White, Pritchard, obviously needing a guy like Shireman to step up at that point, and a draft pick who's coming in, a late round pick. Obviously, it's a bit of a flyer, but that team could be competitive. Kata as well, who played some minutes last year. Maybe you get Al or Luke back, one of the two. I think that's a team that could be above the play-in line next year, I'd say. Like, I think that's the ability of a team like that next year. But a lot of it is going to ride on Brown, and like you said, we'll get to him.
Definitely. And when it comes to a Drew Holiday trade, which I'd say we're both categorizing as likely to happen,
yeah,
who do you think on the roster currently would benefit the most from his departure?
Oh, it's Pritchard. And that's a big reason I look at that too, is I think Pritchard's ready to start. I said that late last year. His ascension, and every time you gave him more opportunity, more minutes, more touches, it seemed like he did more. I want to see that continue. And he's not necessarily young anymore, but he's still in a point in his career where he can grow and expand his game. The defense in the play, like if we're stacking up things in the playoffs that were good, that's in like the top 3 to 5 things that were good in the playoffs for the Celtics, is how much he held up defensively against Orlando, who was sending Paolo and Franz at him. And then the Knicks, who were obviously trying to attack him whenever he got in those games. And he held up every step of the way. So I think that makes you feel even more confident in him starting. He can eat a lot of minutes. His playmaking is improved. And so that actually, to me, is one of the biggest reasons I think you can feel comfortable doing a Holiday deal this summer, is the fact that Pritchard can step up into a starting role next to White, bring some off-ball shooting, play some on-ball, and allow Brown to get off the ball, which I think is going to be important next year a little bit. So that's one of the things I'd be most excited for next year. I'm not in the Noah category of Pritchard enthusiasts who think there's all-star potential there, but he'll get a shot if he's in the starting lineup. And I think great things would happen. Think of all the games, Bobby, where he got a spot start or got to play some extra minutes or take some extra shots. He put up some massive numbers in those situations. So he's on one of the best contracts in the league. He's still in a position where I think he can elevate beyond what we even saw last year. Now, who steps into that bench guard role? Like you mentioned, Dunn, I think that'd be intriguing. Shireman, I know they have some aspirations for him in that position if they do end up making a move like that. So you'd have to figure that out. But White, Pritchard, I like that as a starting backcourt.
Yeah. So with Pritchard, I was so impressed by, and you mentioned it there, with just the profile and the build of some of those players that teams would challenge him to be able to guard, like a Paolo, like a Franz. His on-ball defensive versatility, where he can scale up, that he's just so quick and tenacious that he really digs in. And even against bigger players like a Luka Doncic, he held up. And especially in that game in Boston against the Thunder, I thought he did as good of a job on SGA as anyone the Celtics threw at him that night. And you spoke to Derek White's trainer last offseason, and he talked about how important it was for him to add muscle, especially upper body strength. I spoke to Pritchard at the end of the season, and he talked about doing the same and how important it was for his ability to physically hold up against those types.
Stronger this year. He did.
Definitely. You could see it. And he said that was a huge part of him scaling up defensively. And so that growth, I think he came into the league, and what really stuck with me in 2022 was the job he did in the playoffs when he got chances to guard Kyrie. And so that was like, okay, there's a pretty encouraging baseline for him to work with here if he can keep building. And to his credit, he has. You pair that with the efficiency off the dribble, the leap he made shooting on that front, and just the 3-level scoring, the contact balance and craftiness around the rim, and how he finishes off 2 feet well. I think there's a lot to work with. So like you, it would be one of the more exciting individual developments that I'd want to monitor next season, especially because we think there is a Drew Holiday trade in the pipeline here. Now I want to talk about someone you mentioned, Noah, and her driving the hype train on Peyton Pritchard. You are the conductor for Luke Cornett. The very first people, and one of them really had to be, was Brad Stevens. I remember at his end of season press conference after they lost in 2022, he talked up Luke Cornett. And you were maybe the only one, but definitely the loudest one saying, I believe in this guy. And now look at how that stock has just gone gangbusters for you and turned almost into a blue chipper for you. Is this the end? Do you think Luke Cornett ultimately gets too big an offer in a starting center role elsewhere and he chooses to leave? Or do you think the Celtics, that they're able to keep him?
That's tough. And I think it comes down to the length of these deals. So let's say someone does give him a mid-level for $6 million or whatever that is now, the taxpayer one. That's going to already challenge him quite a bit. And the stock's gone up so high that now it's, where you might risk losing him. So it's gone in the wrong direction for me in that sense, where he might not be in Boston anymore. But the taxpayer mid-level, does someone give him that for 2 years? Because then you're talking about like 13 guaranteed. Celtics do have the bird rights on him, so they could go to 5 years of a minimum and get to 20. So that's going to be how they try to make this work with him here, in terms of guaranteed money. Now, is someone putting in like a 3rd-year team option with that, with Cornett? That's, not as much guaranteed money as the Celtics give him long term there. But if it's 3 years with a 4th year non-guarantee or team option, whatever that would be, all of a sudden that's more money up front and comparable money long term. Now he has to leave the team, go to a new situation. Does that work as well for him there? That was a big reason he stayed last year for a minimum when there was a bigger offer out there for him. Multiple, I believe. But it's going to be tough. And I thought it was telling at that end of season press conference where he left the door open to anything, gave the Al answer, talked to the family and all of that, because I think there's going to be a real market for him out there this offseason. And the Celtics are extremely limited in what they could offer there. Now, if Al retires, if Al moves on, that gives them a little more flexibility and wiggle room there. Again, they can pay Cornett whatever they want for up to 5 years here, which is an advantage they have on everybody else. So they have some flexibility here with him because of how long he's been here at this point. Do I think he's going to stay? I lean yes, just because of how comfortable he is here, because I think the Celtics can do him right somehow, some way. And I think he's another guy like Pritchard who's not young, but continues to show the ability to ascend, complement teammates, what he developed with Tatum last year. I think you want to redevelop that whenever Tatum comes back. Not the healthiest player in the world, but I think did a much better job, like you said, building muscle. In Pritchard's case, I think Luke did that too, showed to be much healthier and more durable, able to play more minutes last year and played stronger too. So his game took a leap last year. When you develop guys like that, and I know the Hauser thing stinks because he had that one great year, championship year, after all those years of developing, and now you might have to move on here. But when you develop guys like that, I think you want to keep them as long as you can, especially guys who are so good at your system here. They're thin at center into the future. They need guys who provide a little continuity at that position. I'm sure he's someone who can help Kata develop a little bit as well if they're going to continue down this Kata development road. So I think there's a lot of reasons to bring back Luke beyond the stability, familiarity with the fan base, importance in the locker room, all that stuff. He's a hell of a player at this point, and I hope they can get something done there. But backup centers are super valuable now. Not every team has a great backup center, and this was the Celtics' 3rd center, as I say over and over again last year. So, yeah, there'll be a market for him. It's going to be really competitive. How much does he want to stay in Boston? I think that's going to say a lot about whether he stays or goes.
Yeah, I think that he'd be willing to challenge himself in a different role, like this system and how they've utilized him and just changed the type of player he is and that style. That has dramatically elevated his career. I don't know if he becomes this player if he's still trying to be that 5-out floor spacer offensively. So it's a great fit. I think he'd be willing to challenge himself and see, can I make it worth with what gets asked of me on another team? He does love it here. There's no doubt. And that stability, that's going to be a huge part of the consideration for him. I expect him to have offers to be a starting center somewhere, probably multiple teams. And those come with, for his market, lucrative deals that are going to be tough for the Celtics to match. The bird rights, like you said, that's what they're clinging to. I think it's important they bring him back. Do you look at it as an either or between him and Kristaps, and who would you prioritize?
Oh, I think you could keep both, and they can play together too, which is a plus. They did quite a bit last year and put up great defensive numbers together. So I think there is room to do both there. But again, at only so high of a price in Cornette's case. Does moving on from Porzingis allow you to keep Cornette? I guess theoretically there it could. Again, depending on where they get below the second apron line or tax line. Again, if we're talking tax line here, it's just going to be brutal what happens this summer in terms of guys going out the door. And I think that would include Porzingis and Cornette in that case. That's just so devastating of a scenario, and it might be one they have to get to by the end of the season. But I think they want to, especially for a new ownership group coming in, I think they want to avoid that immediately, just tearing everything down to save tax money at this point. I mean, you can get within striking distance of the luxury tax line and only pay about 10, 15 million in tax. That was one of the scenarios I played out and still have a decently competitive roster at that point. Getting below that line is just crushing. I mean, Holiday, Porzingis, Cornette, Al, all those guys, and then some maybe, Hauser as well. So that's what you have to hope isn't the prerogative this summer from ownership. I know there's real value in stopping that repeater tax line, and you got to be out of the tax for 2 years to do that. It does make some sense to explore that this year, especially if the season doesn't start the way you want it to. But I think you got to give them a chance. Let them start the year, have as much continuity as you can from last season versus this year. To me, that involves Porzingis, that involves Luke. And I don't know what Al's plans are. I have to assume he's going to continue playing here.
That I think is the safest bet. Everything else is more, hey, we're just working off of instinct at this point. He's a private person. He's very family oriented. I definitely think that for someone who describes his workout regimen as a lifestyle and how good he's continued to look, I definitely expect him to continue playing. But the $1 million question, as you were getting to there, Bob, is, does he say, I have to be on a title contender next season, and I don't think we're that without Jayson? Or is he willing to come back? And I think his family, they love the city. They want to be here. That's the preference. And if Tatum was healthy, I don't think this is too much of a conversation. But ultimately, with what they're weighing, what's your lean on it?
Oh, I just don't know yet. And I don't think he does either. And so that makes it challenging. I think it's going to come down to what's out there for him, what's out there for the team. If they're able to clear a lot of money out and have room to keep him on a competitive salary, I think that leans toward him coming back. If they bring back Luke and there's, Porzingis is still here and every dollar is going to count at that point, I think they leave the door open to him staying on a minimum if he wants to. But it was 2 years, 20 million last time. Can he get upwards of that again? That's going to be tough to pass up, I think, if there's a real contending opportunity that also pays him out there. And I know a lot of people in that mindset of, oh, how could he leave? How could I got past that a little bit when he left last time because it seemed improbable then. And so nothing would surprise me now. I have no idea. I don't think he's made a decision. I don't think the team knows what direction they're going in there yet. I think it's going to depend on what happens everywhere else. Now, I think they need him. They made that clear at the exit interviews there that they could really use him, especially just to have some stability this year. But is he a guy who's playing 35 minutes a night for you in a front court that might not have a ton of depth to start this season? Probably not. Is he using one of the years left in his career, and there's not a ton left at this point, to play for a team that might be a first, second round exit? Probably not. So I do think, as it stands right now, I'd lean toward him not being back next year, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think that it diminishes his legacy in Boston whatsoever. And at that point, as much as there are sentimental ties and talk about the family loving it here, and I do think he's undecided at the moment and just kind of weighing everything as there's just not much clarity on the picture because we don't know what teams are offering and who's coming after him just yet to a definitive enough extent. I do think, though, as you outlined, if teams are offering championship contention and more money, one would think that in his shoes, you're probably taking that. So it would require a lot for him to pass that up to return to Boston. So we'll see. I think from a practical standpoint, you put more stock in him leaving than staying, but it would be huge, as you mentioned, players outlined at exit interviews, if they can keep him. When it comes to Jaylen Brown, and you touched on it, so I'm not going to give it to you in the form of a question, but look, the Mavericks, I don't think they're trading that pick. I think they understand the gift they got, and if you can get Cooper Flagg, still a teenager, on a rookie contract with the potential to be the face of your franchise for a decade plus, you don't pass that up. And even with the fragility of the window that Nico's created, even for Giannis, with his injury concerns and his age, I think you take Cooper Flagg and move forward, and he can still help your team immediately. So the idea of if you're not trading Cooper Flagg for Giannis, you're probably not trading him for Jaylen Brown. And at that point, and maybe the Celtics wouldn't do it anyways, although that one you got to really marinate on. But I just look at what might be out there and think the Celtics ultimately choose to keep Jaylen Brown, who is still in his prime.
Yeah, I think you explore what you could get back from. And again, you're in such a tough situation right now. If you're Boston, you have to explore everything that you could possibly do. So I think they'll explore what they could get back for him this summer. But I think you have to have him as a stability piece. Maybe they view it a different way and think a step back, a real step back, would be advantageous for the long term. Money, second apron, draft next year, being in a good position for that. But to me, once you tear it down to that level, and maybe you're getting some great stuff back, I think it's so hard to get back to winning at that point, especially when you start removing all these guys who've been parts of that winning: Brown, Horford, all the way down the line, Derek White even, who I'm sure you have to explore as well this summer. I keep Brown. You see what you can get back. If someone absolutely blows you away, maybe you think, all right, two super maxes are tough to build around. We're building around Tatum here. It's going to be a long time till he comes back. Where are we even at that point? I get that consideration. But to me, once you're moving off Brown, especially for guys who are younger, earlier in the development curve, potentially draft pick heavy in a trade where you're taking complete flyers, even at the top of the draft. You think of this draft as well. Even some guys in the top 5 to 10 there are flyers.
There's a lot of risk. For example, VJ Edgecombe is one of the top prospects, and it's more because of who he is as an athlete. His game is very raw.
Yeah, so that's a grueling decision because, again, moving off him might be the right move here if he's not able to shoulder the load as the top, guy here, and you're going to really struggle this year. You're going to look back and say, ooh, was there something over the summer you could have done there? But I lean keeping him. I think he's important to the team. I think he's important to the city. I think you got to give this fan base some hope next year, and I think there's a lot of hope in him being able to lead you through this year at a decent level. And that intrigues me more than anything next year. There's a guy who has spoken multiple times about how he has to sacrifice here and how he has the ability to lead a team. Now he gets that chance. I think that's the story that captivates you going into next year is, does this guy have the ability to lead you deep into the playoffs, given his, Supermax status and all NBA status in the past here, and now ability to lead this team full time. I'm really intrigued by that. I think the team should be intrigued too. And I just don't think there's going to be an offer out there this summer that makes it worth moving on from that.
I totally agree with everything you just brought up there. I think that the connective tissue he represents between the franchise and the city and the community, that is massive. And just the bond and how he resonates with Boston, I wouldn't want to give that up. I think there is real value in that and that it matters. You can't just let something like that drive decision making, but it has to be a part of the calculus. He's in his prime, to reiterate that point. He has wanted this chance. It could be really, one, it could be captivating for the fan base and good for business. Two, it could mean a lot for him and the team moving forward. The unknown question, we've seen him sacrifice throughout his career alongside Tatum. There is the question of, if he gets this opportunity and it goes really well, does that benefit the Tatum Brown pair moving forward, or does it become harder for them to find their footing once again? I think that the maturity of these two and how it really is driven by winning, I think that it would be fine. It might take some readjusting that, hey, we're not at the same point we were before Tatum's injury now. The picture's changed, but nonetheless, I think they would figure that out and could ultimately be better for it if Jaylen has a really good season. And maybe if it doesn't go the way that he envisions it will, that it makes it even easier for them as a combination and that synchronicity. So we'll have to see, but I think he means too much to the team and the city. And when you look at what might be out there, if you find a deal that's worth making, so be it. I don't know if that's realistically going to come along and they find something to pull the trigger on. We got 2 bullet points left here, and we can be relatively quick with this next one here. And that is, we've both spoken to leading experts and people in the medical community about the outlook for Jayson Tatum. So I'm curious, as we compare notes here, what's the feedback that you've received from that world about Tatum's injury and the recovery and the road ahead for him?
Yeah, I think, all of us have had a lot of good reporting on this. The, prevailing sentiment, I know that was what Noah wrote about, the speed of the surgery, big plus. This is a surgeon who did Kevin Durant's surgery. I think that's a plus. I also think that there's a surgeon who does that speed bridge technique, which, I haven't confirmed, but could have been in play here, which improves recovery times. We've seen it a lot in the NFL. So all of those things are good. The Achilles is bad, though. And this is an injury that takes a long time. And I think you stay on the cautious side of an injury like this when you're considering up to a year to get right, and when you do come back, you're going to need even more time to be yourself again. So let's say he does come back and, on the quicker side, 7, 8, 9 months. Is it another 3 months after that to where he's back to being Jayson Tatum? That's the challenge here with this thing, is that it's just such a long running injury. And I know Sham said yesterday that the expectation is that he's going to miss most, if not all, of next year. And I think that goes in line with all of these timelines that we're looking at here, especially since you want to keep him healthy for the long run, not just next year. I don't think there's any rushing him back next season. So would I be surprised if he's back on the early side, just given all the ways he's recovered from injuries in the past? No. I think he's probably going to be focused 1,000% on doing everything he needs to come back as quick as possible. I don't think there's any shortcuts here. I don't think there's a guy who struggles with keeping his body conditioned and doing all the right things for his body. So I think those all work in his favor. But, back to that Jaylen point we were just making there about do you keep him, do you move on? Part of the consideration with that, I think, has to be that this is an injury you just don't know how a guy's going to come back from. And if he's not Jayson Tatum on the other side of this injury, I do think you need a guy like Jaylen to be able to lead at least the start of Tatum's recovery at that point, have a runway where Tatum can work back in and ease back in and not just be relied upon to save the day at that point. This is going to be a long-term recovery here, as I think we all knew. But it's great that the first things we're all hearing, from the experts in the aftermath of this is all good news. No complications with the surgery. Got it done quick. Seems to be, at least in this early stage here, on the right track. So that's all we got right now. But it's tough. It's still the injury above all else that you just don't want to see a basketball player go through, because some of the outcomes have been so bad over the years. But, a lot of improvement, I'm sure, has been made with the surgery and the way they do it and the way guys recover from it too.
Yes, I'll say this, and with the Jaylen Tatum point you made there towards the end, they don't really have to try and forecast that because of Jaylen's age. So they can see what it looks like on these fronts. They don't have to predetermine it and try and just make a prediction right now and act on that. They can wait. In that sense, they have time on their side because these are stars that are early in their primes. So I know Jalen's obviously a year older, but again, that's where they can exercise patience. And with the injury and Tatum's outlook, I'll say this, that I spoke to someone who is considered a leader in the field of Achilles repairs, Dr. Kevin Stone. He has his own practice out in California. And what he talked about is twofold. One, that there's been a lot of advancements when it comes to how they treat an Achilles injury, and that he is very big on, and even wrote a book about, it doesn't matter if you're in Little League or you're one of his upper echelon athletes as a client, that there's no reason you can't return better from an Achilles injury. And not that the injury itself obviously makes you better, but that you can return and be Jayson Tatum once again, and you can stay healthy and have a great career. That the Achilles injury, it is probably the most devastating an athlete can sustain. But I think there's been enough advancements that there's a lot of trust, especially on his end, that Jayson Tatum can come back and be an all-NBA first-team caliber superstar. The other thing that he mentioned, though, and this definitely caught my attention because, like you, I have not confirmed that Jayson got the speed bridge procedure, but we know he's someone that wants to come back as quickly as possible, and that Dr. O'Malley is known for that procedure. Dr. Stone actually cautions against it. He stressed that, hey, it's about what does your patient want and what is the doctor most comfortable with. But I pulled it up here. What he told me was that when you go that route, it requires an open incision. And so as soon as you make that, you lose the natural blood clot and some of the factors that we believe go into speeding up the healing and creating a strong repair. So he gets why a surgeon and a patient might opt for that. But at the same time, it's not something that he generally recommends or does and performs. And so the speed bridge procedure, I think people hear, oh, maybe Tatum can come back faster now, and they get excited about that prospect. But this is someone who talked about things like HGH injections and stem cells being really important to the road to recovery. And that when you have this open incision to do the speed bridge procedure, you lose some of those benefits.
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate on all of that. I think different doctors feel different ways about a lot of this stuff, and I'm sure there's pros and cons from Tatum's perspective too about which treatment route they went, safest versus potentially quicker. The one thing that's for sure, whether you got it or not, is that I don't think the team's going to hype up a rapid return. Like, I don't think that they didn't put a timeline on it first and foremost in the release. I don't think there's going to be a lot, especially early on, of always ahead of schedule or, oh, this might happen quicker than we think. I think there's going to be a lot of patience exercise with this thing because in Durant's case, he got the 18 months. A lot of that was the weird scheduling of those seasons. But that time missed, I think, more than anything else, just being as patient as possible and as slow as possible probably benefited him more than anything else in terms of how fresh, ready, effective he was when he got back. He didn't really go through that period of not looking like himself. He hit the ground running. And do we want Tatum to miss 18 months here? No, I don't think it's even necessary. But definitely going slow, I think, can't hurt here because going too fast is putting you in position to do the worst possible thing, which is ruptured again or have a re-injury or some other injury stemming from that. In DeMarcus Cousins' place, he ended up tearing his ACL down the line. And that was pretty much the end of him. So, yeah, I think this is going to be the ultimate test in patience for this team, for this franchise. And with a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier about where they're going to go into next year, it puts them in a interesting position in terms of, do you take a step back now to be in the best possible position when Tatum returns? You probably lean toward yes in that spot because as this roster stands, hard to envision it contending for a championship next year. And that's the ultimate goal. Like, I don't think anything short of that is something that this team's interested in.
So that's my answer. And that's why I think it's imperative that they get under the second apron. Again, by the end of the league year that's upcoming. So Kristaps coming back, that's an intriguing scenario right there, and you can make that work. I do look at, you want some room to, for example, try and bring back Luke Cornett and Al Horford in an ideal world. So maybe it's ultimately this summer that Porzingis and Drew Holiday are moved, but I think you kind of have no choice but to operate as if Tatum is not coming back next season, and therefore you're taking a step back. I would think title contention is off the table. You know, like Brad Stevens, I won't put a ceiling on it, but it's just the most likely scenario. And so at that point, I think you do take a step back to take a step forward. That means getting under the second apron. Hopefully, as you said, that Bill Chisholm and co., they didn't spend this record-setting amount to come in right away and say, we have to get under the luxury tax immediately. A lot of owners, again, a point that you touched on, from a PR sense alone, it's not the first move they want to come in and do and have this dramatic teardown to start their resume as an owner. So I don't think they go that route. Let's certainly hope not. It's bad for business. And then when it comes to this team next season, even if Tatum's not back, I still think they can be competitive. I think they can be good. And the East right now, especially understanding that Giannis might be departing, I think the East is pretty open. And so I think their ceiling is as high as maybe you get the 4th seed. I wouldn't put much stock there, but if we're talking what's the absolute peak, if they max out, I think 4 seed is probably as high as they go. And then I won't go all the way with the floor and be dramatic, but I do think this is a team that at a minimum, I think can be in the play-in tournament and at least be the 7 or 8 in that scenario and have the chance where you get 2 games to win 1. What's your outlook? What's the range you put on this team next year?
I'm with you there. I think the East is wide open. It's funny, though, that's going to be part of the argument Milwaukee makes here to try to keep Giannis, is the possibility that they could edge out everybody else in this East now.
Here's my thing, though. I want really quick. I know it's just long-winded as I usually am. They got cooked by the Pacers 2 years in a row, and you don't know with injuries, but Indiana's healthy. Halliburton's good to go. So that's definitely going to be their argument for keeping Giannis, and that's great for business if he's still there. But can anything really happen with Milwaukee as constructed?
No, not with Lillard out, certainly. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about them too much in either scenario. They're in the picture, but not above the play-in line, I don't think. And then the teams you're projecting ahead of them, Cleveland, regardless of what other adjustments they make, New York, same thing, Indiana, Detroit, I love going into next year, probably going to get some reinforcements there. Orlando, I think, is on the rise, fully healthy next year. They're going to be a real force, so that's already 5, 6 teams there. Philly's one of the wild cards. Milwaukee, one of the wild cards. Brooklyn.
I think Miami is too.
Brooklyn's where Giannis could potentially land. So, that could swing in either direction there. And then, yeah, Miami, depending on what they do, although I lean toward them probably not being in the picture next year just based on where they're at. Atlanta's good too. I mean, there's a real chance you could fall into the play-in below all of those teams if things go great for all those teams. Maybe you move above 1 or 2 if things go in the wrong direction for some of those teams. But I think you can safely assume Washington, Charlotte, Toronto, Chicago, those kind of teams, you're going to be above pretty firmly next year with most constructions of what your roster is going to look like. But unfortunately, that could put you in a play-in position still, where there's no guarantees. And if you lose, you're facing those Dallas odds of moving up in the lottery, which, even though that worked out this year, probably isn't going to most years.
Yeah, I think that the lottery game is not one the Celtics are about to play. Older fans probably still burned by not getting Tim Duncan. And so I think next season it'll be interesting because to me, it has a pretty strong possibility of resembling the Isaiah Thomas Bridge years, where if you can just move off the fact that you're probably not a title contender, just enjoy the ride and appreciate whatever comes. I think there could be some really exciting and at a minimum interesting individual developments when we talk about Jaylen Brown and what does Peyton Pritchard do? What kind of growth do you get from Baylor Shireman in year 2? Are there multiple rookies contributing, or at least one that's worth putting some stock into if you're a fan? So I do think next season is going to be filled with some pretty fascinating storylines for a team that should still be good under most iterations of what we're forecasting here. So I'm excited for what's to come, while hoping that championship contention is just on pause until Jayson Tatum comes back. And that, look, speaking to the medical community, there is a lot of optimism about him coming back and being Jayson Tatum and staying healthy. So that's my outlook on it. Bobby Manning, you have been remarkably generous with your time here on the Celtics Rundown live stream. Comment section is loving you. I've had some people text me as well saying you've been very insightful and informative.
Awesome.
I want to give you the floor right now. Stage is yours to go ahead and plug and promote anything from your work, which is exceptional, to social media handles that you want to get out there. Let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, we got another show coming up later tonight, 4 o'clock. I'm going to talk to Law Murray about these Clippers rumors and see if that's a real destination for Drew as we continue to go through these rumors and reports that are starting to pop up now. We talked to Tim Cato about the Mavericks angle there that came out from Mark Stein a couple of days ago. So shows pumping out over on CLNS Media and Celtics All Access. CLNSmedia.com is where I write, as well as BostonSportsJournal.com every Saturday. So that's the gist for me there. Real Bob Manning on Twitter. If you want to reach me directly, that's the place to go.
If you aren't supporting and checking out Bob's work, you're behind. So catch up, follow him on social media, read everything from CLNS Media to BSJ. He does a phenomenal job, as I'm sure most people here on this live stream are well aware. So Bobby, thank you once again for taking the time and joining us here. The Celtics Rundown live stream will return Wednesday at noon. There's a chance we come back sooner, but that is the plan as of now. So I will talk to you all then. Enjoy the rest of your week. See you then.